Hello everyone and welcome to our channel. Today we are pleased to take you to the late 14th century in 1390 to discover a castle, and actually a bit more than a castle, but the whole domain as well of Bodiam. Bodiam is in England, in the East Sussex, in the south of England, actually standing like 20 kilometers far from the coast, about so. And it's a castle that has been built in 1390 based upon a license to crenellate given by the King of England, Richard II, to a knight that is named Edward Dalingridge. The castle of Bodiam is really popular in England. It's a beautiful castle. It still has its moat. Inside is totally in ruins, but on the outside it's still preserved. And we want to take advantage of this reconstitution to talk about Bodiam, of course, his owner, historical context, and as well medieval economy. As far as historical context, we are in the middle of the 100 Years' War. This troubled time between the French and English kingdom, where the English kings have claimed the throne of France, and the French kings and nobles wouldn't want them to own it, so they've been refusing. And so that started a long period of wars and battles between both countries. We are actually in 1390 in the middle of this 100 Years' War, and Richard II has given the license to crenellate Bodiam, or to build it, to this knight, in order to protect the English soil from the king's enemies. So we assume that it's to resist to a potential invasion from the French that Bodiam was built. In 1381 there is also a big rebellion of peasants in England. The taxation situation is pretty terrible. It has been as well like years of plagues. Many people died in Europe. Almost half of the people have disappeared. And all this context create like some inside tension into the Kingdom of England, but as well in France, this same period of time, for the same reason. And we know that Edward Dalingridge has been called by the English court to try to calm down this rebellion in his area. So, of course, if officially Bodiam was built to resist against French invasion, a couple of years before, some big naval forces from Castile and France has been seen over there. It's also a possibility that to protect East Sussex from some insiders was an additional reason for Bodiam to be built. It's hard to know, it's just an hypothesis I mentioned, so we know a bit more about the context. Actually, we've been working on many searches, historical and archaeological searches we could find around to build this map. It should be, we hope, like pretty close from what Bodiam was at this period of time. We've been using a couple of documents and writing, and as well a model that is standing actually at Bodiam. Bodiam is being owned by a society that is named National Trust, and that is trying to do some restoration work and organize some visits and so. It's a very popular castle in England. It's a beautiful castle, being inspired from the Philippine architecture, from the French architecture, that's for sure, though it has no dungeon. Being pretty classic, as we had the 14th century, and remember the Philippine architecture has been created almost 200 years before that. It's pretty modern as well, as inside Bodiam we'll find, based upon archaeological searches, all the comfort of a pretty modern castle in the end, as well as a military installation and stuff like this that are like pretty modern for a castle of this kind. We'll have the opportunity to talk about this on these videos. We'll probably make two videos, the first one being this one, being dedicated to the domain, Edward Dalingridge family, and the medieval economy that was taking place in Bodiam in 1390. After he got his license to crenellate in 1385, Bodiam was built pretty fast by Edward Dalingridge. He will not enjoy it long time as he himself died in 1395. But we have some elements, some strong points that are interesting to check to picture a bit more what was Bodiam at this period of time and how a castle could organize his future prosperity in his own area, right? At this period of time, there are like many ponds in Bodiam, a bit more than today. Those two ponds on the right here have disappeared. This one on the left is much smaller. The moat is still here, fortunately, because it makes Bodiam really beautiful. And the mill pond over there is still here, but much smaller. At the very back of the map there, you can see the Rother river. Bodiam is standing at the north of this river, so the north is actually behind us. So with Edward Dalingrige, the family of this noble has been rising in the East Sussex in terms of political power and economical power over 100 years before Edward Dalingrige, mainly doing strategic weddings. You know, it's a very important way to grow his power in the gentry at this period of time. So the grandfather started, and then the grandfather, until the father of Edward Dalingrige as well, did a very interesting wedding. And then they grew from a small landholder and become a very important landholder in the East Sussex. Roger Dalingrige, the father of Edward Dalingrige, reached to a point that his earnings from the land are big enough for him to pretend to chivalry. And we find this noble being a pretty important person in the gentry of the East Sussex. He has done some very interesting alliance with the Earl of Arundel, and he is also organizing for his cadet son, Edward Dalingrige, a pretty interesting wedding. So again, from not being from East Sussex a couple of years before, the Dalingrige family end up being very important in the East Sussex. As being eligible for chivalry, Roger will take advantage of that to put his son very early on the battlefield. So we find the first presence of Edward Dalingrige. He is like 13 years old on the French battlefield, aside the son of Edward III at the campaign of Reims, and he's already here fighting. He's not yet a knight, but a couple of years after he's 20 years old and he is a knight, and so he'll spend the most of his military career as a knight on the French soil and the French battlefield over various official campaigns, but not only. He has been part as well of the Free Companies. So what are they? In 1316, a truce is being signed, and by this truce, Edward III will accept to renounce the throne of France, only having some territories left in France. So normally in such situation, militaries, armies and knights will retire, but it has not been the case. And some of them stayed on the French soil and turned to be mercenaries. They are not the only one. There are some German as well, some Spanish, some French. And for years and years they will stay on the French soil and spread some fears and terror into the country, looting and fleecing, ransoming peasants and nobles, and making their fortune for their own interest and out of the English crown one. The situation is a bit more complex than this, as we don't really know if Edward III didn't want to call them back in England, or if he just kept it like this, thinking that for future battles it might be interesting to have some mercenary already on the battlefield, or if he didn't want the knight and all these people to come back in England. The situation being pretty tense over there. Over history, we know as well for a fact that in many cases between battles, disoccupied knights are pretty bad for countries. Wherever they are, it's not rare they are doing bad things, looting and fleecing and stuff like this. So it's possible that Edward III thought they were in a better place out of England. So there is a very controversial debate about Bodiam, and some English historian will say that he has been financed with the French peasants' blood, as effectively on the many years spent by Edward Dalingridge in France, not all of them were fighting upon the English crown approval, but rather his own fortune and his own interest. It's a troubled time again, so it will not be the only unoccupied knights that do that. But the Free Company has been a real plague for France, and indeed it took some years for Charles V to get rid of them. Beginning of the 15th century, they would have been eradicated, but still, during these years where Edward Dalingridge was on the French ground, they were still active. In some cases, from official campaign of the king or his lords were approved by the English kingdom, and Free Company will then fight in the same armies. So it's a bit of official campaign and unofficial ones. For example, Edward Dalingridge has been part of the Great Knighthood in 1373. The Duke of Lancaster, John of Gaunt, decided to raise an army of 9,000 men and to go to France to take back some territory. At this period of time, Charles V is more like in favor of a sort of passive war. He's asking to his lords to strengthen their town, to reinforce their battlements and walls, to create some machicolations, and so to be able to fight against any potential siege coming from the English. He's also asking to some small town or lords that cannot have the resources and the money to do it, to leave their places, so that if eventually English will come, they will find them empty. And in the end, his strategy, that has been mocked by some English people at this period of time, was pretty efficient. As for example, in the case of the Great Chevauchée, the Great Knighthood, John of Gaunt didn't take some very important strategic town, but rather came back to England with only a few men, as most of them have been eradicated by the various battles, but most surely by the Black Plague and by the dysentery, and they've been welcomed in England as heroes as well, but despite the fact that they had not been coming so victorious, so again, it's possible for a knight at this period of time to make a fortune and become rich, not being specifically victorious. Edward Dalingridge spent like most of his career in France, then he turned back in England, and there started to follow up his presence on the East Sussex Council and to raise his political power in England. He has been serving as well to protect the English coasts, and in some very important assignment that he has been given by the English court at this period of time. And finally, he got his authorization to build Bodiam in 1385 due to his long experience and career as a knight and a soldier in this 100 Years' War. Again, he's born in 1346, so he's almost 30 when he built Bodiam, and this castle is the witness of this 100 Years' War, as well as the trajectory of this Dalingridge family and this knight. At this period of time, we have on the Bodiam domain various interesting things. Some people would have said a bit fast that Bodiam was the castle built for prestige more than for military defense. At this period of time, the late 14th century, there is a big transition indeed, and probably Bodiam is one of the witnesses of this type of transition as well, where more and more castles are being built only for prestige and less for military reasons, as wars are changing. In the middle of the 12th century, trebuchet has been created, damaging tremendously castles. And not only that, but at the 14th century, we start to have artillery, cannon, and heavy weapons. And the castle will be less and less able to resist to that as well. So war will change. over time, and during the 15th century, castle will no longer be built to defend territories, and nobles and war and military strategy will more put in front of potential attackers a wall of flesh, that has been said like this, rather than a wall of stone, meaning by that sending like army on the ground to fight other army face to face, or artillery against artillery, and castle will no longer be so strategic in terms of defense of territory. That is being reflected in Bodiam, and historians are really debating still in England to know if Bodiam was only a way for Edward Dalingridge to get some prestige and to raise in his ascension of powers and political ambition in the East Sussex and the English court, or if it would have been really an efficient castle in case of invasion. There are like arguments against that or for that. We will check them in another video. Let's talk about briefly in this one to finish on what we could have find in Bodiam at this period of time on this land. Here we have some villains, so they are like tenants, they rent land and farms. Depending on the map, we find 4 to 5 farms. The 5th one is standing here with a little land on some map. On some other one we just find 4 farms, so we've been building 4 of them. Here we have some nice wheat and a mod that is being made lately for medieval engineer. In this map we've been using different mod. A mod is a way to improve the game and to bring some additional feature. So we will also tribute to modders all along this video, and this wheat is absolutely beautiful. So we assume that these tenants and farms will have some relationship with the castle, right? And exchanging products and taking advantage of the fact that out there behind this wall you have probably 40 people that are living, right? So we've been imagining like wheat and also of course probably some vegetables and fruits. We also make crop rotation, crop rotation is pretty popular at this time. With intensive agriculture, probably people have been stopping doing that, but it was really wise from the medieval people to ensure that the ground and soil could rest over 3 years. So we've been putting this crop rotation here. We had some fun. It's not we forgot to put culture, we did it intentionally. In Bodiam you have as well like a jetty here on the river. Probably a bit smaller than this one, but like a witness of the fact that Edward Dalingridge intended to do some trade on the river and to take advantage of it as well. Also we find some track of contracts he made with the Fair of Bodiam, an agreement he has with them, so that tells us a bit about the economical ambition he had for Bodiam, and again an argument against the fact that it's just like a nice house for a knight to retire, but maybe a more ambitious project that it looks like at first stage. There is a bridge here as well in Bodiam, so this way is a pretty big one, so we reproduce this bridge, right? Normally the access to the castle will be by this way at this period of time, along the tree over there. We've been using pines, it's a mod. Of course you have to imagine more like oaks and stuff like this in the East Sussex and not pines, right? But it's the only tree we had, and we had to use some tree to try to reflect one of the big compliments that is being made various times to Bodiam, which is his nice integration in the landscape. So we wanted to bring this feeling with these trees for you to get the idea, right? Here, if we follow up on this little path, we'll find like something very interesting, that is a contract and an agreement that got Edward Dalingridge in 1386, meaning 1 year after having the license to crenulate. So probably something he has prepared as well a bit before that. He got the possibility to use the river to make a watermill. So a mill for land at this period of time is like a gold mine, right? And here we've been reproducing this mill. Actually, there is nothing left from this mill. I was saying like earlier that this mill pound is almost, it's really like smaller than this nowadays. We've been using to make this mill a mod that is named gears. They are really awesome wheels in wood and copper. Of course, you have to picture here more wood than copper, right? But if you would like to have such a nice wheel and big and round and circled and so, with the current block of medieval engineer, it could be difficult. So we had to use this, and we took advantage of it to build some interesting drawbridge and system and transmission, like to have fun with. That's for the medieval engineer player. We use a mod named timber as well, that allow us to have like some thin piece of wood that we could use for this wheel, but as well to have doors and so. Let's check the mechanism. So we've been doing it dynamic. We have, as in a normal Watermill, a dormant wheel, which is normally cylindric, but we put it squared for the blocks we have now in medieval engineer. On top of it, we have a rotating wheel. All of them are in stones. And here we have a piece that you can throw the grain inside. He will go down through this wheel until he steps in the middle, and here he will be processed. So it's the way a Watermill is working actually. And the mechanism we've been using against some wheel. Of course, we use for this map a water that is coming from an awesome mod as well, but it's static water, is a voxel water. So we had to simulate the rotation of the wheel using a rother. You know, this fabulous block of medieval engineer that is a sort of permanent rotor to allow us simulating watermill or windmill and stuff like this. And here we have a simple transmission, so been using again like this awesome gears. Of course, you have to picture again wood. The transmission of a Watermill is exactly the same. It's a very simple one, right? This piece sometimes is different, and of course it's not in metal, it's always, pretty much always in wood at this period of time. Blacksmithing pieces of this kind and this size in metal will be pretty complex, right? Even if it's possible. But it will be as well pretty costly, and it's much easier to do them in wood, so it's the way you have to picture them. Here is for the Watermill. So again, that says us that, you know, if he got a contract for that, assuming he will do like some trade with the tenant over there, but all around many people could be interested in using his mill, a fortune can be made. This mill can attract some people. Due to the size of the land, we may imagine that there are spaces around the domain to grow some more farms and so. So probably the ambition of Edward Dalingrige for Bodiam was to ensure its prosperity in an active way, and not only to be like a nice place for him to retire and watch the ponds around Bodiam, or to stay near his chimney looking at a nice wood fire, but probably to have some more ambition to exist economically, politically, and at the military level in East Sussex. So here is a short presentation of the medieval economy and the historical context around Bodiam. Here on some map we find what could have been a possible justing field. You know, you have to remember like Edward Dalingrige was a knight, so it won't be surprising. As the maps and so mentioned that it's a possible one, we assume they didn't find enough archaeological things to make it certain, right? So we didn't build it, but we mention it, it's over there. Out there you have the manoir. It has been put this way on the model. In the reality, the manor, when doing some additional research, is not here. Is in another valley out there, like on the other side of these hills. And it's not so close, so it has been put here like more of a symbol. We didn't find any picture nor like maps or documents with detail about this manor, so we made it as we find it on the model. It's interesting to picture it and make the difference between the current castle and what was before this castle. You have to remember that the license to crenulate was given by Richard II for Edward Allingridge to reinforce his manoir, and instead of it, he built Bodiam. Again, the debate is still open. Is Bodiam built only for the prestige of his owner? The thing is sure that after he built it, Edward Allingridge seemed to have grown another few steps in conquering more power in East Sussex and at the English court. And we will talk about all this in a second video, where we will talk as well a bit more about Bodiam architecture, defense system, and all the rooms we could find inside it for us to enjoy and discover a bit more the sweetness of this troubled time period. And again, this beautiful fairy tale castle that stands still nowadays in the East Sussex and that is being loved by many English people. I hope you like this video. I wish you an excellent day, and I hope you'll join us for the other one where we'll talk a bit more about the castle. Thanks a lot for watching, and thanks a lot for your time. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye bye.